TikTok safe. A judge has blocked President Trump's attempt to ban the social media sensation for now. But the clock is ticking. This on the eve of the first U.S. presidential debate. And Apple versus Epic, the battle royale heads to court today. How the judge is weighing the future of Fortnite. And it is being touted as perhaps the most groundbreaking treatment for COVID-19. We will speak to the maker of new antibody technology, with more than 1 million people now dead from the disease worldwide. Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Markets rallying today. Tech again leading the increase into the green. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, who's been covering the market back and forth. So, Abigail, we were talking about a rally at the end of last week. Is that going to now extend through this week?
Well, it certainly did today, Emily. The bulls were out, and it wasn't just tech. So in some ways, the breadth of today's rally, perhaps more impressive than the size of it. But over the last 3 days, we have the three major averages up. The NASDAQ 100 over this time period up about 5%. Its best 3 days since April. So that's the degree of the buying power. And that is really all of that big tech that you're talking about from Point Boost, really helping out the NASDAQ. Again, a very, very solid gain. And it was driven last week by Apple, which put up its first up week since August, climbing back above the 50-day moving average. The fundamentals, as you and I have been talking about, not really changing so much. So perhaps more technical selling in September after some technical buying, froth buying in August, a bit of an evening out. Now, on the day, I was mentioning the breadth, the financials, the industrials, energy did very well. But the New York FANG complex, those mega caps did quite well, too. And there's Apple up 2.4%. Tesla continuing its rebound from the battery day disappointment, up for another day in a row, up 3.4%. Take a look at Virgin Galactic. This is not a part of the FANG index, but I couldn't resist putting it on the board, up 25%. Bank of America and a few other firms positive on this company today, touting the potential for space tourism. So you see that stock, Emily, up 25%. Behind that could be a bit of a short squeeze. I believe there's a greater than 30% bear short interest. So some of those bears wanting out as some of the big banks are getting positive on Virgin Galactic.
Now, we are watching some big tech direct listings happening this week. Palantir, we're expecting on Wednesday, data software company Asana as well. What is the environment that will await them?
Well, you know, it seems to be the environment that we have this year, as surprising as it is, at least to me, that we have this pandemic and some, a large uncertainty out there. We have a very strong market for companies to go public. Now, of course, a direct listing is different than an IPO. We're taking a look at this huge run up for the IPO ETF, the Renaissance IPO ETF, up 139% from the March low, up in a big way on the year as well. A direct listing allows private investors to cash in. It doesn't actually raise money for the company itself. The fact that we do have so many companies rushing to get public, Emily, though, may suggest that some bankers are advising these companies to raise that money, go public, while the window is open, in case that some uncertainty in the future would close that window. So it's interesting. There's some saying that the IPO, the amount raised this year could actually be a record. But again, there is that point to it that it could reflect some of the uncertainties that we're seeing. But right now, really cashing in. And as you're mentioning, Palantir and Asana this week expected to go off. And it seems right now, with the bullish background that we have, at least over the last 3 days, it would certainly support that. Not so bullish, though. Oracle down on the day, one of the few down stocks on the day. And this, of course, as the drama around TikTok intensifies, as you were talking about before, federal judge blocking President Trump's ban. And it seems, Emily, in most of the market reports today, not a lot of attention being given to Oracle or TikTok. Investors, their appetite for this drama is waning until there's more clarity. I'm sure you'll be digging in more.
We are going to dig in right now. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for that update. Speaking of Oracle, of course, shares have accelerated on the back of this TikTok news. But what is happening with TikTok? The Trump administration suffering yet another setback in its TikTok showdown. A federal judge has temporarily blocked the president's ban on new downloads of the video sharing network. TikTok was due to be removed from U.S. app stores by midnight Sunday. Meantime, the judge refused to halt the November deadline for the sale of TikTok's U.S. assets, so that one still stands. To discuss, we are joined by Bloomberg Tech's Kurt Wagner, who has been following every twist and turn of this story. Kurt, what is the latest as it stands right now?
Well, you just nailed it, Emily. It's the fact that TikTok is still able to operate, and that was decided late last night by the judge who believed that the Trump administration was exceeding its legal authority in trying to ban the app from the app stores. So that's obviously not the outcome that the president or his administration was hoping for. As of right now on the deal, we're still kind of stuck in limbo because we're waiting for approval from the Chinese government. We're hearing mixed things still around the actual deal terms from those involved. And so at this point, it seems as though all sides are still working to get this deal done, but there's still so many question marks that have yet to be answered.
And didn't it seem that the Chinese government was becoming increasingly hostile towards any kind of deal, at least if you read state-run media?
Absolutely. There was a time when this first was announced where it seemed like the Chinese government would actually be happy with this because the deal as it stood seemed to call for ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, to have a majority control in this new entity. And so the Chinese government at first seemed like they might be on board. The view from the U.S. side was that perhaps this was a bad deal for the Trump administration. And then since then, what we've seen is the president and Oracle come out and say that they don't think ByteDance is going to be involved at all in this new TikTok entity. And we've seen kind of a turnaround from the Chinese government, who are, calling this an American trap. They're kind of suggesting that this is a dirty deal. So at this point, it does not seem I'm not super optimistic that the Chinese government is going to come around on board with the deal, assuming that ByteDance is not actually in control of this new company.
Meantime, we're on the eve of the first U.S. presidential debate. You've got the election coming up the first week of November. The ultimate deadline is after the election has happened. So how big a setback is this for the president if he wanted to hold up TikTok as some measure of success?
I think there's no doubt that TikTok has kind of found itself in the middle of this geopolitical trade war, right? And to have this go the way that it did with the judge yesterday saying that the president's exceeding his power is not a good look, because ideally I'm sure the president would love to be able to go into that debate and go into this election saying, look at the hard line that I've drawn against China, and especially around protecting Americans' data. That has yet to really manifest for him. And so we will see, I'm sure that he will continue to fight this. It's possible that this could be elevated to another court. I would not be shocked if that's indeed what happens. But certainly, to your point, not a great look right now for the president as he's trying to kind of use this as a real killer as he's heading into the election.
Meantime, TikTok users some of them have had a field day with President Trump's campaign. What's happening on and inside the platform as we approach Election Day, given that that's going to be a hotbed of political content?
Well, it's funny you mention that because you may remember the president's rally from a few months ago where TikTok users kind of claimed that they messed up with the tickets and that they oversold the rally and then no one actually showed up. What I think is going to be more important for TikTok probably is what they do from a company standpoint. We've seen Facebook and Twitter and Snap come out with very hard lines around misinformation. We've seen them come out with voting registration efforts. TikTok has a chance to do some of that stuff as well, and that could be a benefit for them if you really think that perhaps, taking a hard line against misinformation around the election might kind of win them some favor here in the U.S. But I think you bring up a good point, which is that the content that is happening on there has not been very flattering to the president thus far. I'm not really sure that that's going to change at all before election night.
All right. Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner continuing to report out that TikTok story for us. Thank you so much, Kurt, for that update. Coming up, Apple and Epic Games in court this morning. What's happening here? How will it play out for the gaming sector? We're going to dig in coming up. This is Bloomberg. Lawyers for Apple and Epic went head-to-head this morning in a virtual court hearing in an ongoing battle royale over the App Store and its fees. Epic has sued both Apple and Google in the name of its hit game Fortnite, accusing both companies of being monopolies and robbing developers with a 30% commission on in-app purchases. Where does the dispute stand now? Joining us now, Laura Martin, senior analyst at Needham, who covers Apple, Google, and the gaming sector. Laura, great to have you back with us on Bloomberg Technology. So the judge in court this morning said that she believes that this should be taken to a jury. If a jury decides who's right, Apple or Epic, it's less likely for that ruling to be appealed. Who do you think is in the right, Apple or Epic?
Platforms add a lot of value. So for example, Epic Games launched in June of 17, and within 12 months, there were 78 million users because Apple and Android put that app into everyone's hand at no cost to it, virtually overnight. They had great content, and Apple and Android basically allowed that content to be viewable. The marketing expenses here are far more than in any other world than if Apple and Android didn't have those, what I would call free-to-use platforms. Okay, 2 years later, Fortnite is making $2 billion a year. Their 30% of that is going to the platform, so they're writing $600 million checks to Apple and to Google, and they're mad about that. And what they really want is a volume discount, like we used to have in the cable business. That is anti-competitive to the next would-be startup called Fortnite 2 by a different company that wants to displace Fortnite. The reason Fortnite had no competitive disadvantage over existing game players is it paid the same fee and it was little. Now it's big, and somebody's got to cover these $40 billion of cost to run the App Store. And Epic's like, we're too big. We don't like $600 million payouts, so we want to break on the price, which is anti-competitive to the small guy that wants to start because somebody's got to pay the $40 billion.
That said, there's a rising chorus of big companies and smaller companies that say that Apple's cut is unfair. Companies like Facebook with its gaming products, Spotify, Match Group, smaller new email startups are saying this isn't fair. What about their argument?
So I think this is a contractual debate, just like we had in cable, right? Disney would get mad that Comcast was charging too much. And so they drop covered. This is a contractual, negotiated economic problem. And of course you should be, arguing that you're overpaying, because what's the downside of that? Everybody wins, except for not Apple shareholders. So I think these are contracts. I think that both Apple and Google will win. It is their platform. I think it is really important that for actually the future of consumers, that these platforms be allowed to charge and cover their costs, or they're not incented to upgrade their platforms for consumers.
What about the proclamation that Apple and Google are monopolies and that these are incredibly important platforms for any developer, any gaming company, and that a 30% cut just is too steep?
Right. So again, economic difference of opinion. This requires hundreds of millions of consumers to adopt them. So the reason there was an oligopoly to two competitors down from 7 is consumers have decided that these two platforms are the best. So now what's great for developers is they only have to do, like for iOS, you can reach all 950 million of their phones with one set of app designs. You got to get it approved by Apple, but that's it. And now you reach 950 million consumers because Apple has made a product that consumers care about. So don't underestimate the time to market advantage that has versus the old world where there were 7 competitors, because that would have been costing app developers a lot more money as they had to have 7 separate teams to develop apps.
Now, let's talk about the gaming sector in particular, because Epic CEO Tim Sweeney has been very complimentary of, for example, how Microsoft has handled Xbox and the content that is allowed to run on Xbox. We've got this new Amazon gaming service, Luna. Are there enough alternative platforms that a gaming company could be as successful without having to rely on Apple or Google?
So the Apple ecosystem of 950 million people monetizes 2 times higher than the Android ecosystem. So I would say it would be nearly impossible for a game company to actually economically work without the Apple iOS ecosystem because of the demographic. In mobile games are where all the growth is, and the best mobile games are done for the Apple Store because Apple sends it back until it's good enough for consumer, the best product for a consumer. So there's a lot of quality control and R&D being done for all of these apps to make sure they are best practices on Apple phones. And as you know, consoles are a rich person's niche. The console's expensive, the super fast screen is expensive, the games are $60 each. So it's lovely that Epic thinks Xbox is doing good work. Talk about the richest of the rich. Okay, I just don't think that's relevant to most consumers in the world today. Apple reaches 1 billion consumers.
I love how you don't sugarcoat anything, Laura. Always appreciate your opinions here on the show. I do want to get your thoughts on Amazon's new gaming service, given that you cover the gaming sector as well. Gaming has been such a huge, we've seen so many people flood to video games in the midst of this pandemic. We're coming into the holiday season, people sheltering in place with nothing to do. They're going to want to play even more games. What is your outlook for Amazon's platform in, as we've discussed, an already crowded market?
Yeah, so I really like what Amazon is doing in the video game space. And I think so I really like this notion that streaming types of sensibilities that we see in I'm going to call it the streaming world, are actually coming to the game space. So we have a number of existing streaming services. EA Origin Access, I think, is the most interesting one myself, but Microsoft has an entry. Stadia is Google's. So here's another one. Amazon has one. Content, I would say, is suboptimal. It doesn't really compare to the more entrenched streaming services, but it's $6, and the other ones are sort of $10 to $15. And I fully expect Amazon to iterate over time and catch up on the content side. The important point for Amazon is that it owns Twitch, which is the dominant viewing platform for video games, and it owns AWS, which is the dominant server farm that allows speed of play for its new streaming service. So when it gets more content and closes the content gap, it will have 2 structural advantages over every other streaming game service, which is Twitch users who spend 3 hours a day can get lower customer acquisition costs, and server farm could be faster for AWS.
All right, Laura Martin, always good to have you here on the show. We'll be watching to see how it all plays out as we head into the holiday season. Laura Martin of Needham there. Thanks so much. All right, coming up, how Nikola's Trevor Milton went from EDV darling to disgraced founder, and why early investors in the startup might have seen it coming. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Nikola shares falling today after news that some key investors had concerns about its founder, now disgraced Trevor Milton, before the company went public in June. The electric truck startup has been embroiled in scandal and setbacks since a short seller report on September 10th accused Nikola of lies and deception around its technology. Bloomberg's West Coast reporter Ed Ludlow joins me now. So what exactly did investors know about Trevor Milton before the company went public, Ed?
Yeah, so sources have told us that ahead of that June reverse merger and listing, that investors basically viewed Trevor as not the best pair of hands to take the company public and then sort of execute on the things that they wanted to do. You know, a lot of people draw parallels between Trevor Milton and Elon Musk, but they did not believe Trevor to be anywhere near sort of Elon Musk's level. So they pushed for Trevor to be removed from the CEO position and be changed to chairman of the board, which is what ended up happening. By the time that Nikola completed its reverse merger with that blank check company with the SPAC, Trevor was no longer CEO. He did become chairman of the board, and Mark Russell took over as CEO. And it's interesting because it kind of raises questions about what due diligence both that SPAC and also later partners like General Motors did on the company, what they did and did not know. And even with Trevor Milton's departure from Nikola, his presence still hangs over the company. Another piece of information that we got this week from Trevor's cousin is that an accusation, a claim that Trevor Milton sexually assaulted her in 1999. That is a claim which Trevor Milton disputes. But again, even with Trevor now away from the company for more than a week, he no longer is on the board. He no longer holds any operating position. There are questions about his business savviness, his background. He started a number of startups over the last 2 decades, many of them embroiled in litigation. He, for example, started an e-commerce company in 2009 called upillar.com. He told me in an interview in June, Emily, that upillar.com pioneered the online shopping cart, but that business failed because he simply couldn't keep up with demand and raise funds for it. So he had this history of startups that weren't successful, that were embroiled in litigation, and there was a sense at the time of the merger that he wasn't the best person to take the company forward.
Ed, so many questions. One of them being then, what did GM know, or why didn't they know any of this?
So sources have told us that GM did know quite a lot, especially on Nikola's technology. They said that they did do due diligence, which basically unveiled that General Motors' fuel cell and battery technology was actually superior to Nikola's, but they knew that. They went in with their eyes open. The thing is that Nikola displayed an ability to raise funds principally through Trevor Milton. They did have and they do have two working fuel cell prototypes. And the idea was that General Motors would leverage that, use their own technology, and use the foundation of what Nikola set up to go forward and make a success of this hydrogen fuel cell truck business. We also know, according to sources, that talks with BP, energy giant BP, are still ongoing over a hydrogen infrastructure partnership. Steve Gursky, who is now the board is now the chair of Nikola's board. He was once a GM executive. He made the introduction between the two companies, said he did his due diligence. Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, says she's done her due diligence. So it's hard to tell.
Okay. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, I know you'll continue to cover this one for us. Thank you so much. Great reporting from you on the latest Nikola developments. Coming up, we're going to take a look at what to expect out of tomorrow's first presidential debate in a viral news cycle. There's no room for error. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Trump and Biden hit the stage in Cleveland tomorrow night, marking the very first time the two will debate each other. Tomorrow's event will be the first of 3 presidential debates leading up to the election, leaving little room for error on either side. With us now on the phone to look ahead to the event, our Bloomberg News politics editor, Wendy Benjaminson. Wendy, what's at stake tomorrow? Obviously, it's a huge night. Both of these candidates have a lot on the line.
They absolutely do have a lot on the line. It is tomorrow night, the first debate, as you said, and each one has to make sure that they don't make an error that could change the very few votes that are still undecided in this election. And remember, many people, 1 million people, have already voted. So there's fewer and fewer people they can persuade, and they've got to try to get Biden's got to get some of Trump's voters, and Trump's got to get some of Biden's voters. Biden has to make sure that he doesn't slip up, have one of those moments that feed into Trump's narrative that he may be a little too old for the job. And Trump has to not be too off the cuff and in rally mode in this very sort of formalized environment.
How important is it in this news cycle, which is relentless, when 5 seconds can clinch or seal your fate?
That's exactly right. In any debate, that's happened. Incumbent presidents traditionally don't do that well in the first debate for their reelection. It's a weird thing. Jimmy Carter, between Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. The incumbent presidents, I think they're overconfident, or they just think they can wing this, which Trump has been saying he's not going to prepare. He's just winging it, even though it looked like he was having mock debates over the weekend. But they go into this and they lose the debate. They don't always lose the election. So, these moments can, morph into, they can go away very quickly, too.
Absolutely, especially in an unforgiving news cycle. That said, Biden didn't perform so well in the primary debates, and he has struggled with public speaking. The convention, his speech that night, that final night, was very well received. Do we know how much he's been preparing? Do we know how well prepared he is for this? And what are you expecting?
Well, he is. We believe he is well prepared. He is a very traditional politician. So he has spent the last week and a half in debate prep, which means he's locked in a room or on Zoom with his senior advisors. Bob Bauer, a longtime Washington Republican and husband of one of his senior advisors, has been playing Donald Trump in mock debates, and they've been reviewing the facts and figures and going over everything. And remember, Biden's a policy wonk, so he's going to come armed with facts and figures. The danger is whether he gets any of those facts and figures wrong, because the expectation is that he knows this stuff. And so if he gets it wrong, that will be looked at as, a bigger mistake than if Donald Trump gets a fact wrong, because like him or not, Donald Trump doesn't always get his facts right. So it's expected for Donald Trump. It's not expected for Joe Biden.
Now, that said, Biden's campaign has been given a gift, which is this reporting about Trump's tax returns just, 48 hours before the first debate. How much will that feature tomorrow night? And how are you expecting President Trump to explain this and Biden to attack him?
It's really interesting because it is not one of the set topics. They have the topics already set so the candidates could prepare for it. So clearly it wasn't the set topic. Biden will seize probably on the first opportunity he can to mention it. But what we're hearing from the Trump campaign today is that they welcome it too, because they believe that most voters will say, yeah, stick it to the IRS, you go. Wouldn't it be great if I could get away with paying that little in taxes? And certainly Trump's voters believe that. They voted for him in 2016, knowing that there was these suspicions that he may have cheated on his taxes or didn't pay the full amount. And so Trump is actually looking forward to it coming up so he can pivot it to his claim that Biden will raise taxes on middle-class Americans and to say, yeah, look, I outsmarted the IRS. Look at me, which is what he said in 2016.
Now, here in California, we're in the middle of another heat wave. More devastating fires have broken out. The air quality is horrible, and yet climate change is another topic that is not on the agenda. What is on the agenda tomorrow night? What are the topics that they have planned to cover?
It's very likely climate change will be on the agenda in future debates. For this first one, they're going to examine Trump's and Biden's records. That's the first topic, so climate change could come up there. The pandemic, the economy, the Supreme Court, racial justice and violence in the cities, and election integrity. Those are the 6 topics that are set for tomorrow night. But of course, a candidate can, dodge and weave and bring up just about anything he wants to.
All right, well, I'm going to be busting out the popcorn. Thank you so much, Wendy Benjaminson, for giving us that preview on what to expect tomorrow. I know you will be watching with laptop in hand. All right, a reminder, Bloomberg will be bringing you special coverage of the presidential debates tomorrow starting 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Bloomberg Television. Coming up, a bridge to a much-anticipated vaccine. We're going to speak to the CEO of ImmunoPrecise about its potentially groundbreaking antibody treatments next. This is Bloomberg. President Trump today announced plans to distribute millions of Abbott's COVID-19 rapid result tests in the coming week and urged that they be used in schools. He also said 100 million doses of the vaccine will be available before the end of the year. Earlier today, Bloomberg's Tom Keenan, Francine Lacroix spoke to Dr. Joshua Sharfstein of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health about what is needed for a successful vaccine.
Vaccine acceptance is extremely important because you can have a great vaccine, but as they say, vaccines don't save lives, it's vaccination that saves lives, and people are going to want to have to take it. So what that's about is the confidence that people have in the process. And unfortunately, I think the White House has undermined that confidence by putting it in such an intense political context. And I think that's why there are a number of steps that both the FDA can take and others are thinking of taking to depoliticize it and just make it about, the science in a way that can inspire doctors to feel confident and as a result, many people to feel confident about it.
Professor, this came up 4, 5, 6 times this weekend. Let's get an update from you on a Monday as it gets a little bit colder out there. Will there be a shortage of other vaccines / shots like a so-called flu shot?
Well, in a way, I'm kind of hoping there'll be a shortage because that'll mean that everyone's getting the flu shot. So we want to have as many people as possible to get the flu shot, particularly people who are at high risk for flu and particularly people who may not have gotten the vaccine before and can sort of get used to getting vaccines through the flu shot, which will protect them during the flu season. So unfortunately, there probably is not enough flu vaccine for the entire population. So people should go out and get the flu shot. And if we run out, we run out. And hopefully we'll run out, on the early side to really try to protect as many people as possible from the flu.
Explain the medicine of a given virus or bacteria overlaid on the likelihood of having great harm from the COVID virus.
In other words, having both together.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Well said.
So,
clearer than me.
Yeah.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay. Sure, no problem. Well, I mean, there are a couple of problems, that could come up. One is just many more sick patients. There's some years where the flu, fills up the hospitals by itself, and then on top of that, you would have a pandemic. So that's a really scary scenario. I think it's less likely if people wear masks and keep their distance, because the same things that keep people from getting COVID also keep people from getting flu. And in the countries in the southern hemisphere where people are taking a lot of precautions, they've had very mild flu seasons in their winter. So that's what we're hoping. However, if people disregard masking, and are going out and doing their thing, flu could start circulating, and you're going to see even worse problems there, both with COVID and flu. And of course, the process of getting medical care for flu will bring people in contact with people with COVID. And so, I think either places are going to do relatively well on both or relatively poorly on both.
Joshua, what exactly are monoclonal antibodies? I mean, from extensive reading, as far as I can make out, they're the guys that basically protect you, right? They're made in a lab and they protect you against infection. And what do we know about these monoclonal antibodies to fight COVID-19?
Sure. It's a little bit like the plasma. Plasma is just people's, all the antibodies that people have are in the plasma. Monoclonal antibodies are trying to take either one or maybe a few of those antibodies that are thought to be the most effective to protect against COVID-19, and then they make a lot of them in a that they produce them. It's not taken from somebody. And the idea is that they could be given to people who maybe are just exposed to the virus but haven't even gotten sick yet, and they could keep them from getting sick in the first place. It also could be used as an early treatment. And, there's some hints that, out of the studies that they may be effective. So we'll have to see when the studies get reported. But that's another, tool in the toolkit to protect people.
Dr. Joshua Sharfstein there, Johns Hopkins Vice Dean for Public Health Practice at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. The school, again, supported by Michael Bloomberg, the founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. For more now on potential antibody candidates for COVID-19, Dr. Anthony Fauci has said an effective antibody treatment could be a bridge to a successful vaccine. And joining us now for more is Jennifer Bath, the CEO of ImmunoPrecise, a company that is working to discover and develop therapies against COVID-19. Jennifer, talk to us about your antibody technology, polytope therapy, which you believe is the most comprehensive COVID-19 treatment out there.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. And thank you for having me on the show. So we started our polytope therapy approach all the way back in January. We did so really believing that we were very well positioned to launch a program with the scale and rigor that was required to produce the diversity of antibodies that were needed to produce what we call an antibody cocktail. And cocktail therapies are very widely believed to be the most promising approach to addressing viruses like SARS virus, especially RNA viruses in particular, that are known to go through what's called virus escape through mutations. And so, in this process, we launched what we think is actually the most comprehensive program. And without going into the details, what we ended up with is what we believe is the most comprehensive and broad panel of potential therapeutic antibodies, at least that we're aware of, that support the full cocktail therapy approach for sustainable, therapies against SARS-CoV-2. And the aim of doing this is to put together a cocktail of 3 or more antibodies that work in what we call a synergistic fashion. And so it means that, 1 + 1 + 1 isn't necessarily equal to 3. They enhance and improve the capability of the cocktail. And the capability of protecting and treating COVID by using them together in this formulation. Right now, this is the only cocktail therapy with 3 or more antibodies that we know of that's being moved forward. There's one right now that's in the clinic by Regeneron that is a 2 monoclonal antibody cocktail. And we do feel strongly that it's very important to incorporate 3 or more antibodies into these cocktails if you do so with a focus on safety in particular and also efficacy. Mm-hmm.
So if you're a patient who's been infected, you have COVID-19, you take your antibody cocktail, what happens?
Initial applications for patients will probably be IV administered, but basically what happens is if you're a patient that already is infected with disease, the hope is that it will prevent the SARS-CoV-2 virus from spreading further throughout the body by preventing it from infecting any new cells.
So talk to us about what this means as we work towards a vaccine. If we have a successful antibody treatment now, essentially, then the urgency of a vaccine, we don't need it right away, correct? I mean, how could this change the game?
Well, I mean, we definitely do believe absolutely both are important, but there are some ways that it does change in terms of how we respond to a number of different scenarios. One is patients or individuals who might have been exposed to the virus but aren't yet showing any signs or symptoms. So anybody that has a positive test for the virus, we could treat prophylactically with the antibody, meaning that we can help prevent the onset of that disease. We can also treat, as was just earlier mentioned, but not just early stage patients, but later stage patients as well. And so, it does definitely reduce the risk of mortality and morbidity in those patients. But I think also something else that should not be overlooked is that you can administer, prophylactically antibodies to people who are high-risk individuals, so frontline responders, elderly, immunocompromised individuals, people who would be ideal candidates for being additionally protected, but also candidates who probably or most likely would not respond to a vaccine quite as well for elderly and immunocompromised. So you do have some protection you can put forward to those people that are most at risk before a vaccine would be available.
So when will a comprehensive, tested treatment be available to the public? Would it come out before April, which may be the soonest we get a vaccine?
Mm-hmm. So, with regard to, let me clarify your question. With response to ImmunoPrecise's therapeutic antibody or just any therapeutic coming out forward?
ImmunoPrecise is
absolutely.
your antibody treatment.
Absolutely. We do anticipate it would definitely be available by April. So right now we're in manufacturing for the preclinical trials, which are already established. And then we are actually doing parallel manufacturing to produce what's called a cell bank. Those are the cells that will actually go into the clinical manufacturing for use in humans. And so from our perspective, we are hoping to be aligned and prepared to go into clinical trials this winter.
All right. Fascinating stuff, Jennifer Bath, ImmunoPrecise CEO. We'll be tracking your progress. Thank you so much for joining us. Still ahead, a logistics startup that's going up against Amazon, UPS, and FedEx. We're going to hear from the CEO of ShipBob, fresh off new funding from SoftBank, about how they're planning to meet the holiday rush. Next, this is Bloomberg. ShipBob, a logistics provider for e-commerce brands, has received $68 billion in new funding from SoftBank's Vision Fund. The company is working to take on household delivery names like Amazon, UPS, and FedEx by managing more of the logistics process and building its own fulfillment centers. Joining us now for more is ShipBob CEO Dhruv Saxena. Dhruv, thank you so much for joining us. So what is it that you have that you think can stand up against Amazon, UPS, and FedEx, which of course have all been working for years on their logistics operations?
Yes, absolutely. Emily, thank you for having me on this show. ShipBob, what we are doing is effectively providing an Amazon-like fulfillment experience, but for small to mid-sized direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands. And so our customers are really, the mom-and-pop brands who've built their own storefront or their own website, and they don't have the scale by themselves to provide a 2-day shipping experience on their website. And so what ShipBob does is we have a network of fulfillment centers across the country, and we help these brands have access to a 2-day, next-day shipping experience at a price point which makes sense for these small to mid-sized brands.
So talk to us a little bit about the demand that you've been seeing in the middle of the pandemic and going into the holiday shopping season.
Yeah, so we've seen a significant surge in demand from our customers. So our brands, are completely spread out across different spectrum from food, health, cosmetics, jewelry, apparel. And so majority of the customers on our platform, range from anywhere from $500,000 of annual GMV all the way up to $50 to $60 million of annual GMV. And so when COVID happened, we weren't quite sure how these small brands would respond to it. But, we've been very, very surprised and happy with the resilience of these small, mid-sized brands. So across our entire network, we are seeing almost like Black Friday, Cyber Monday-like volumes starting from April and continuing all the way up to October. And we don't anticipate it slowing down, especially as we head into the holiday season.
Now, you just took on this additional funding from SoftBank. The Vision Fund, of course, has struggled with some of its investments. Some of its investments, like WeWork, for example, was certainly not worked out. Did you consider that when deciding to take money from SoftBank?
Yeah, absolutely. So, over the last few months, we got an opportunity to meet the team at SoftBank. We got a chance to interact with Irwin and John, and their approach to company building, their approach to the space was very much aligned with how we were approaching things at ShipBob, so there was strong alignment there. And the second piece is, SoftBank has a portfolio of companies all across the world. And so as we think about expanding our fulfillment network abroad, having relationships in the SoftBank portfolio companies stood out for us. And so we thought, SoftBank could be a great capital partner for us in this next stage of growth.
All right. We will keep our eye on your progress. ShipBob CEO Dhruv Saxena, thank you so much for joining us. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we're going to be bringing you special coverage of the presidential debates tomorrow, starting at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I am Emily Chang in San Francisco. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia coming up next. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Bloomberg.